library coordinator for the Federation in Indianapolis. And welcome to Navigating Judaism. And today we have Jonathan Mincer from the ACL and Marla. Did I say that right? ADL. What is wrong with me? Pardon me. And Marla, and with JCRC is here as well. This idea it's been in the works for a long time. I remember it was over a year ago. I was somewhere and I ran into Lindsay Mintz from JCRC, and we were talking about collaborating on something, and then we kind of put it away, and I wanted to do a parenting class. And so I started doing surveys at my events, and almost unanimously parents were interested in learning about anti-Semitism and, navigating Judaism in the public schools. So that's where the idea came from. And we're really excited to be here. And I think now Lindsay's going to tell you a little bit about the JCRC.
Lindsay, you're muted, FYI.
I'm sorry, I'm having microphone issues, so I missed the end of Robbie's, but seeing the agenda and the JCRC 101, I'll assume I'm up. It's a friendly audience, so it can be a little less formal. A big thanks to Robbie and PJ Library and the Jewish Federation and Jonathan and the ADL for saying yes to this idea. So I'm Lindsay, I'm the JCRC Executive Director, and as Robbie started to share, we've been thinking about ways to engage parents in some of these difficult conversations. And, how early is too early? What is going on with anti-Semitism? What is anti-Zionism? What are we seeing in schools? Why is there always a conflict around Rosh Hashanah? Why is my kid having to do coloring sheets of Christmas trees? These questions come up every year, and every year parents are sort of exasperated. And a few years ago, JCRC moved from sort of a reactionary position, waiting for a phone call from a parent, to saying we need to be proactive. And so this is part of that. If you hit the next slide, Marla. Well, I'll just, yeah. So the goals of this three-part series is really just to open up the doors of communication and be a resource. PJ Library is this incredible resource of amazing Jewish content and books, which enables conversations between parents and kids of several ages about all sorts of Jewish topics. But talking about anti-Semitism, even a little bit more broadly, and today, we have to recognize racism generally. How do we do that? And JCRC, while we're not an education institution, ADL is in many ways, and the Federation is through CGL in many ways. And so we recognize that if we continue to go upstream, when we're talking with parents of kids in college who are dealing with anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism on campus, we say, well, let's start talking to them in high school. Well, in high school, is it already not too late? But, how early can we really start this conversation? And we think that we can start it when our kids are in elementary school. And it might not be, showing, the most intense examples of anti-Semitism today, but it can be educating ourselves first as parents, so we know what's going on. That's what we're doing today. And then in the later sessions, we're going to be talking about how parents can model some Jewish identity and pride in holidays, and give kids the tools to start talking about their being Jewish at an early age, so that when they get to middle school and high school, they feel more confident. So that confidence and just supporting families in generally and knowing that we're a place families can turn. Next slide, Marla. Really briefly, JCRC is a nonprofit organization that is funded by the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis. And we have a pretty broad agenda. We are a relationship building organization. It's in our name. And so we maintain relationships and communicate with government officials, with interfaith leaders, with leaders in the Black and Hispanic and LGBT community. We are the community's Israel advocacy organization and the media relations organization. But all of these things that we do circle back to our being an organization that combats anti-Semitism. Because we recognize that doing all of these things, advocating on domestic policy, meeting our neighbors and other communities, advocating for those most in need, helping American communities understand what's going on in Israel, all of these things help break down barriers of understanding so that we're not, quote unquote, that other. And hopefully people will be less likely to harbor anti-Jewish ideas, maybe buried somewhere deep inside. And we're the resource, as I talked about, providing programs also for teachers. We do teacher training on how to teach about Judaism, how to teach about the Arab-Israeli conflict, how to teach about anti-Semitism. Recognizing that education is often key for so many initiatives across the board. And in 2018, you can go to the next slide, Marla, we launched the Stand Up Speak Out program. These are, and hopefully this PJ Library program will sit under this umbrella too as a collaboration. You can see Words to Action in there. That's a collaboration with ADL. Our student-to-student program trains Jewish teens in high school to talk in classrooms where there isn't a Jewish presence in teams of 3 or 4 about what it's like to be Jewish. Our Israel Engagement Fellowship
I think Lindsay's saying that we should just move on from here. All right, Marla, I know you can't see the chat. Lindsay's saying just to kind of move from here. So I think we'll start our program.
Give me 1 second. I am just getting the other PowerPoint, and now I will share the screen. Good.
Great. So, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Mincer. I'm the Associate Regional Director at the ADL office in Chicago. So I'm speaking to you from Chicago. Just quickly about me, I so value our relationship with the Indianapolis JCRC. We've been working on them through multiple issues, everything from attempting to pass hate crimes legislation in Indiana, to Israel advocacy, responding to anti-Semitic incidents, and doing trainings like this. So thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all this afternoon. Just quickly about me, Associate Regional Director. I've been with ADL for about 2 years now. I do our communications, our policy, and educational incident response work. Before that, I was a political and elections attorney in San Francisco for 4 years. I also taught English and did research in Israel for a year, which was really amazing. We can move forward to the next slide. I'm going to take 3 slides just so you know who ADL is, and then we're going to jump right into our program. Marla's going to lead the program, which is our Words to Action program, which is really a facilitation program where we're looking to hear the voices from everybody in the room. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. The ADL, or the Anti-Defamation League, was founded over 100 years ago, actually in Chicago. The dual mission of the ADL is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. So what does that mean? ADL is more than an organization focused on just anti-Semitism, though it's the reason we're here today. We consider ourselves more broadly to be an anti-hate organization, an organization fighting all the obias and isms, as we would say, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia. And the reason we do this is very simple. One, it's the right thing to do. But two, and perhaps more importantly, we know that hate is not occurring in a vacuum. We know that if we want to address the hate targeting one community, that we have to address the hate that is targeting all communities. So if we can go forward to the next slide, you'll see that how does ADL do this? Similar to JCRC, a private tax-exempt nonpartisan organization, we have 25 offices all across our country that do the daily on-the-ground work like I'm doing today. We're based in New York. My office, ADL Midwest, covers 6 Midwestern states, including Indiana, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Northern Illinois in the Chicago area. And just the last slide, just so you know who we are, how do we quote unquote fight hate? Marla, if we can go to the next slide. Our work really falls into 3 main buckets. Our investigation and research work, this is done at our Center on Extremism and our Center on Technology and Society, in which we're researching the trends in white supremacist activity and online extremism and anti-Semitism, creating reports and working with law enforcement at times to track these extremist elements we're seeing. Our education and training work, that includes our Words to Action program, which is a facilitation-based model for in-group Jewish students and adults to discuss confronting and understanding anti-Semitism. Our anti-bias and bullying prevention work we do in schools through our No Place for Hate and World of Difference Institute. We also train law enforcement on things like identifying hate crimes, extremism, and implicit bias. Finally, before we move on to the program, advocating and assisting, which means assisting, using our voice in the media, as using our voice on Capitol Hill, using our voices in state houses across the country, including in conjunction with JCRC in Indianapolis, and helping those respond to bias-based incidents. So now I'm going to turn it over to Marla, who will talk about our actual agenda for the day and really start to get the conversation moving. And I'm really excited to be a part of this.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Marla Topiel. I am the Israel and Anti-Semitism Education Coordinator at the JCRC. I facilitate the Stand Up Speak Out programs that Lindsay had went over earlier. And as she had mentioned, one of the hats, so to say, is I am a facilitator with the ADL for the Words to Action program, which I will be facilitating all of us today. As Jonathan mentioned, the program is designed to be interactive, so soon enough we'll all start talking and it won't just be a couple of us. It's designed to empower and equip participants to combat anti-Semitism. So this program really is, students and young adults, college students, and today we'll be going through the lens of, as adults, as parents, as family members of young students, how to help them by first learning ourselves. Today, our objectives are to increase understanding of anti-Semitism and how it impacts students, provide skills to help students respond effectively and appropriately to anti-Semitism. Some of our activities today are going to be through adult lenses, and that's because how can we help others if we don't fully understand it ourselves? We will begin with going over some ground rules to create a really great safe space for dialogue, an opening activity, going over the current landscape of ADL does an excellent job, unfortunately, that we have this, tracking anti-Semitism and hate incidents, and then going over some tips, and then going through some activities on skills on how to respond and help your student if they face anti-Semitism and other hate. Feel free to ask questions. This is a dialogue. And fortunately, we're a small group, so we can really dive deep into really great conversation. Okay, so first we're gonna do some ground rules. I'm sure this isn't our first, guided conversation for many of us. Respect others, use I statements, ask questions. Please ask questions. That's what the space is for. Really encourage that. Respect confidentiality. What goes on here, what we talk about stays, kind of the vaguest rules. Be conscientious of how much we're speaking, but we're a small group, so I don't think that'll be a problem. And create a safe space. Does that sound good to everyone? I know I can't see everyone's faces, so I'm going to take the couple people's thumbs up and nods to move on. Great, thanks, Debbie. Okay, so unfortunately, I cannot see the chat, so this kind of goes against, you can do the thumbs up, perfect. So for this activity, please patience with me. I'm still learning Zoom. I know I'm a little late to the party. I should have had a couple months of practice, but slowly getting there. I'm going to say a couple statements, raise your hand, do the thumbs up if you know how, otherwise in the chat we'll show you a video, but there's no pressure to, whichever way you figure out, and we'll figure it out together. Okay, so I'll read a statement, raise your hand, do the thumbs up. Raise your hand if you are an Indianapolis Colts fan, or thumbs up. I see some halves.
Only a few.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right.
Okay. You wear a Jewish star, tie, or other similar accessory. Ooh, sorry. You had a virtual Passover Seder this year. You have been stereotyped by others because you are Jewish. You have seen anti-Semitic content with your student on TV, online. You have struggled to explain anti-Semitism to your student. You are concerned about confronting anti-Semitism with your student. Your student has experienced anti-Semitism. Okay, so if you're unable to chat, please use the chat function. Otherwise, I encourage you to turn your mics on and let's get talking. First question, what did you learn from this activity? Either about yourself or others' responses?
I'll start off. I think I saw a lot of hands go up for seeing the content on TV, online, anti-Semitic stuff. And also I realized a lot of concern about how to have these discussions. So it was kind of reaffirming, so I'm not the only one, right, experiencing and seeing these things online.
Anyone else feel the same way as Jonathan? Similar but different? Okay. Did anything surprise you about this activity? Was it surprising that so many people raised their hands, about seeing something anti-Semitic online, or did it not surprise you?
Sadly, no. Although I guess I'm a little surprised. I don't know. Can you hear me again yet?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm a little surprised that there aren't that many Colts fans among us, but. No, and I'll just say that, obviously the people who are choosing to participate today, are wanting to engage in this conversation, but part of what this exercise is to give us all a sense for what our middle schooler could participate in. This is a program middle schooler and a high schooler student could participate in.
Yeah, so for a lot of students, as a facilitator, I've seen when you ask this question, is this surprising? so many are surprised because they think that they're alone, that they are the only one that sees this, hears this, experiences this, or maybe it's just another friend, or, you know, it's a friend, you know, that might not be Jewish, but has also experienced, you know, hate. So it's interesting as adults that, you know, we're not as surprised, but for your student, for a lot of them, it's very eye-opening. And also when we do this, you know, similar activities about, you know, setting the stage, because this is, you know, a comfort activity to help create a safe space. You know, interesting, the students, you know, are a little shy at first. That's why it's, you know, cults or this. And then we get a little deeper, and then you see them raise a little higher. So this is just also just a really good activity to help connect with your student. Okay. Did we notice any patterns about people's experiences? I kind of think we all were not surprised based off the last question and a little all on the same page. Did other people's responses match yours? If not, what do you think might account for any differences? Minus the cults, I think. People raise their hands at the same points. Okay. Does anyone have anything that they haven't added? Because then we'll move on. Okay, I'll take that. So first we'll define anti-Semitism. Would it be better if I read it out loud, or because it's visual, if we just all read it ourselves? Would it be helpful if I also read it out loud?
Yeah, it's always
Yes.
good to.
Okay. Anti-Semitism is a prejudice and or discrimination that is directed towards Jews. Anti-Semitism can be based on stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people, their religious practices and beliefs, or the Jewish state of Israel. And these are some common tropes and stereotypes. Has everyone, hopefully one of these is new, but has anyone, does this look familiar to people? Are these tropes that?
So I'll take it from here. That so when we no it's fine. So we often get asked as we so the definition that was presented was, and it was the kind of definition we use with our students. Obviously, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has a more kind of complex definition with examples. But as we start to talk about the words like stereotypes and discrimination and prejudice, we often get asked, okay, well, what does that look like? So as we go to that slide with the tropes and the stereotypes, we can begin to have a discussion, again, in an age-appropriate way about what do those tropes look like. When I was growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a very religious part of the state, it was always that you Jews killed Jesus, right? Or the idea that Jewish people are more loyal to their religion or to Israel than they are to America or the country in which they live, that dual loyalty trope, which we see engaged a lot in politics now. The idea of power and control, that Jews control the media, the government, and then the classic thing about being cheap and greedy. This is when I was growing up having pennies thrown at my feet. Unfortunately, and as we kind of discussed, as I'll discuss in a moment, we're starting to see these classic tropes still remaining in the worlds in which our children are operating. So if we can go to the next slide, I think it's kind of a good transition, even one more forward to, so if the question then becomes, these are the stereotypes, these are the tropes. The first question I know you want to ask me is, okay, Jonathan, you're telling me this exists, but what percentage of people actually believe this crap, right? What is the state of these attitudes in America? So every few years, the ADL actually does a survey to answer just that question. Unfortunately, I can't get on the phone on a survey and say, hi, sir, madam, very nice to meet you. Are you an anti-Semite? Probably not going to get a very robust answer there. So as we hire our polling firms that do this, we actually ask 11 questions that play on these exact same anti-Semitic tropes. Are Jewish people more loyal to Israel than the country in which they live? Do they have too much power in business? If you answer 6 out of 11 times that these tropes are probably true, we say that you have strongly anti-Semitic attitudes. I'm not going to label you an anti-Semite. I don't know what's in your heart. So before we move to the next slide, I'll actually like to get some thoughts. What percentage of Americans do you believe hold these views in 2019? 6 out of 11 times. Feel free to throw it in the chat or just call it out. Let's get some numbers.
Way too many.
Way too many.
I don't know. 70%?
70%. Any other guesses? Lock them in.
40%.
40. I heard, I think 30 also. Marla, let's advance the slide to see the answer. Over 50. The answer is actually 11%. 11% of Americans hold 6 of these 11 anti-Semitic tropes to be probably true. And as you can see, contrary to what many people believe, there wasn't a big spike in these attitudes post-2016. But let's keep perspective here. 11% of Americans is over 35 million people, about the state of California. So these still attitudes, while constant through the 2000s with higher levels in the 60s and early 90s, are still very prevalent. If Marla goes to the next slide, you can see some of the crosstabs. 27% of Americans believing that Jews are responsible for killing Jesus, though that's not historically accurate. And then the Pope in the Nostra Aetate said that Jews are not culpable in the 60s, correct? The dual loyalty trope that we're seeing so much in our political dialogue, 24% of Americans believing this. When you start to talk about power and control, you start to get to the 11s and 15%. So now what do we know? We know that attitudes are the same, but as has been so fully reported, I see the questions about states. This is a nationwide survey with 100 respondents, and it's kind of done like a presidential survey. So by state, it's not clear, but we'll talk about the incidents by state. So now we know attitudes are the same, but we know incidents are at an all-time high. Every year, ADL, in conjunction with NDJCRC, we share data, record the amount of anti-Semitic incidents that are occurring nationwide. In 2019, it was the highest rate ever for anti-Semitic incidents that the ADL has recorded since we started doing this 40 years ago. You can see in the graph, this is nationwide statistics, and we'll talk about the local incidents in a moment, a 12% increase from 2018, but a more than 60% increase from 2016. So to keep in mind, incidents remaining attitudes remaining pretty level, but incidents going up. Let's talk about why that dynamic is happening. Another trend we're seeing, if we go to the next slide, is what we're seeing in schools. Throughout the Midwest, we've seen an almost 60% increase in incidents that are happening in K through 12 schools compared to 20% nationwide. So this is disturbing for a few reasons, right? One, this is what our students, our children are facing every day. And two, unfortunately, maybe this is a sign for what's to come in later generations. We're seeing it manifest in schools. As these students become adults, it could be worse. So what are the trends? What are we seeing when me and Marla go into schools and actually talk to students? Here's what they tell me is happening. Swastikas, graffiti, Heil Hitler salutes. A lot of this Nazi rhetoric and imagery still going. Diss tracks. This is students like if they were rappers with the beef, writing fake songs against each other, but using, when the target is Jewish, using anti-Semitic themes. TikTok videos. We saw one out of Minnesota recently where students were pretending like they went to Auschwitz. Social media comments on Instagram saying, how could you even say you're Jewish? Holocaust, and then the jokes about money still persisting. We go to the next slide. We must also realize that unfortunately this is increasingly moving online, especially in the era of COVID. A 2018 survey that ADL did showed that almost 50% of adult users have reported online harassment. 37% said this is severe. So this is sustained harassment, threats, doxing, releasing of public information. The top 2 reasons for this harassment are one's identity and one's politics. And then when we talk about what's going on to the next slide, online, video games, these online player video games that many of your students may, even in middle school, the Fortnites of the world, be playing. Our survey of these people who use these video games shows 65% reported severe harassment on these video games. And if you look down through the survey, 23% say they've been exposed to discussions of white supremacist ideology. So what is happening here? Not only is the internet being used as a way to target individuals, it's also being used almost as a recruitment tool at the same time. And you can see even discussions about Holocaust denial. So moving forward, another example that I just want to bring you aware of, this is not really a school-based issue, but the rise in anti-Semitism we're seeing in the era of COVID-19. Obviously, what is more concerning, but not a discussion for today, is the rise in xenophobia, and other anti-Asian rhetoric. As our experts at the Center of Extremism are tracking websites like 4chan and 8chan and Gab and certain subreddits, they're starting to see, even in January, starting to blame Jews, those classic tropes we talked about for in the era of coronavirus, saying that Jewish people are like vermin, you can see on the left, saying that Jewish people are using coronavirus as a Trojan horse, even blaming George Soros, that power and control trope. And these are, frankly, apologies for the stark imagery, these are the mild versions of what we see. And we get to be concerned because this world always exists in these kind of fringe websites. But what it doesn't exist is when we start to get more concerned, when we see it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, saying that people should go to Jewish institutions and cough on kosher items in the market to infect Jews with this. If we can move on. And another thing that we're seeing, and that we're unfortunately seeing in schools, especially as we go online, is this idea of Zoom bombing. The act of interrupting meetings just like this, right? People are taking control of the screen and putting swastikas, these Hitler memes, KKK, telling people that using expletives against Jews. Everyone from college courses to book clubs to local government. And this isn't just a Jewish phenomenon, though sometimes this Nazi imagery is used. It's usually done by trolls to target all different types of people to try to create havoc. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that JCRC and many other people are trying to prevent this by certain controls. Having a waiting room before you start a Zoom call so you can see who's entering it. Having multiple co-hosts on the call. There's 3 co-hosts, so if somebody quote unquote acts up, you can kick them out immediately. Muting all the participants like is done right now as you enter the meeting. No one except for me and Marla can share our screen, so now no one else can show potentially painful imagery on the screen. So just one more trend I wanted to talk about in terms of what we're seeing, especially in the area of COVID-19. And I think this is my placeholder to talk about what is specifically happening in Indiana, excuse me. Perfect, and I will kick it off to my colleagues.
Okay, so Lindsay and I will talk about what we're seeing in Indiana in schools. Not sure if Lindsay wanted to.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry about my poor audio at times. So in Indiana, as Jonathan said, we share, and ADL's got such an incredible resource for us and support for us. And there are times when it's outside of Indianapolis that we actually hear from ADL if something has happened in parts of Indiana. But we keep track of things that are happening here. And it's an immediate sort of, triage moment of what is it that happened? Usually it's in a school. And how are we communicating with both the family and student and then the school itself? Whether there's actually more of it, which there is, but also, through word of mouth, people are knowing to share with us or reach out to us. This is the stuff that we hear about or that makes it to, viral social media. But there are plenty of families who've reached out quietly when something has happened between 2 students or something concerning as far as an article or a book or the statements of a teacher. So, what do we do? And from the JCRC's perspective, we face in both directions. We want to support the family, and oftentimes when I'm talking to parents or maybe high school students, I say you're not alone. Doesn't make it necessarily feel any better, but one thing I also communicate is that no matter how this particular instance gets resolved, it's not going to feel good. You know, even in a best case scenario, this has happened in your child's school or classroom or group of friends. And even best case scenarios, you know, you now have interacted with, on a very personal level, with anti-Semitism today. So we support families, and sometimes it's just being a lens, you know, an ear to listen. Other times it's helping a family navigate through a process. Other times, if the family says, you know, we want to step back and we want JCRC to step in, at that point we will step in. And when we communicate with the school, you know, our first job actually is to not get the incident on the front page of the papers. We want the school to recognize that the Jewish community is a partner and a resource, and looking to help it be a teaching moment, quote unquote. And sometimes that's difficult because they sort of start to circle the wagons depending on how public the incident is. But we have really good relations with superintendents, principals, and certainly teachers. A lot of that goodwill comes from the training that we do on how to teach about this kind of stuff. So they know they can come to us and say, this happened in my classroom. So sometimes we actually hear it from a teacher. Marla, am I missing anything that you wanted me to go over on that slide? Okay.
No, I think really just to stress that we're a resource, you know, and especially as, you know, your student is getting older, we're not just serving as a resource for, you know, teachers. Lindsay touched upon this briefly, but, you know, I just really wanted to stress that, you know, we're here and involved as little or as much as you want, whether something happened or something didn't happen.
Even proactively. I mean, that's also one of the really important things. I mean, this stuff is happening. I mean, and the conversations I have with a parent who says, I can't believe it's happening. Okay, it's happening. Now what? And you can wait for it to happen to your child, or your child might see it happen to another, you know, student. But we can also be, you know, proactive. And what I say to principals or administrators is, this is not a direct reflection of your students or your teachers or your administrators. This is happening. What's going to set you apart is how you respond and how openly you are going to be talking about this with the student body and with parents and with teachers. And this is where we turn to the ADL often and say, you know, there's an organization, ADL, and they have incredible resources from teacher training to school-wide curricula, No Place for Hate schools. You know, there's different levels of ways that schools can own this moment and be proactive in trying to, you know, graduate students, whether that's graduating from middle school or high school, that are thoughtful, that don't sit by. One thing that ADL talks about is being an upstander. You know, when we talk about, are we going to witness something in our life? Probably. What are we going to do about it? And start practicing that. That's what really the Words to Action is about in many ways.
Which I think is a perfect transition to, okay, so now we know what the state of hate is. Where do we go from here? What can us as parents of students do right now? So the first thing we must realize is, the question I always get is, okay, why is this happening? There are many reasons why this is happening. I'm going to put just 3 here, but I know that there are many others that I'm sure you're more than willing to contribute. One, we saw the internet and social media. We're seeing both as a way to harass and spread hate, but also as a way for others to connect with other people with similar ideologies and fester that hate. What do I mean by that? You no longer have to go to the woods to a KKK meeting in the middle of the night to connect with extremists and like-minded individuals. You can go online right here on your phone and go to these websites and see a 24-hour white supremacist rally. Our political and social environment. What I mean by that is, without, you know, speaking about any politician or any political party or anything like that, that our current highly partisan situation is making people perhaps feel more inclined, more empowered to spew hate, maybe feeling as though there are no consequences for acting upon hateful ideologies. And finally, ignorance, especially in the K through 12 schools. We are not teaching and learning the history of hate, of anti-Semitism, of the civil rights movement, anti-bias principles. And I think ignorance is a big problem of what we're seeing, especially in the K through 12 schools. Just one more example, only 11 states currently require Holocaust and genocide education, and most states don't even have civics requirements. So the first things first, when a student sees an incident, what do we recommend that they do? I apologize for the graphic, for the image on the right. This is something that was an elementary school was tagged with this graffiti in Minneapolis recently, last year. First of all, is take a picture or screenshot. Keep the receipts, as we say. We want to make sure students are getting very good at this, especially as they see Snapchat or Instagram comments, to make sure that they can show what happened. If there's a swastika or something you see in the bathroom, take a picture of it. Telling a trusted adult. Every student I'm hoping has some trusted adult, whether it be an older brother, a parent, a soccer coach, someone in the cafeteria who works, a member of the administrative staff, a teacher, somebody who they can go to start to have this conversation with about what to do moving forward. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but hopefully trying to encourage somebody, whoever that person may be, to reach out to the student, to reach out to that person. Support those who've been targeted, and then start to speak out against hate and to show that your community doesn't stand for the hate that you are seeing. To steal what Mr. Rogers would say, that look for the helpers is one of the key lessons, especially with our middle school students, that we try to push forward. When there's something scary in the news, his mom always said, look for the helpers. How do we begin to have these conversations in our own houses? So here's kind of a step-by-step that I would recommend. The first thing that you can see is prepare and process. There's a check mark there because we're doing that right now. Understanding the background of the hate and anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the community, and start to process your own emotions, your own feelings about this, because you want to make sure that you are in the place where you can lead this conversation. Make space for the conversation. What do I mean by that? I mean, don't do what my father did and at a red light look to me and says, hey, Jonathan, do you need to know about the birds and the bees, right? Find the right space, whether it be after dinner, maybe in a Sunday afternoon when everyone's watching TV. Make the space to have a serious conversation about these topics. Be alert. Be alert for the signs of withdrawal and stress and confusion that your student may be facing in this conversation. And listen, obviously use active listening skills, make sure that your student feels heard, but be prepared to hear something that you might not think that you're going to hear. Statements like, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. I don't want to go to Sunday school. Are something bad going to happen? Really listen and start to help your student process those emotions. Reassure them that organizations like JCRC, ADL, the principal at the school, whomever it may be, are working to confront this hate, right? It's not all lost. Be honest about your emotion, what you know, what you don't know, what is the state of affairs. And the most important one is to take action. As you have these conversations, you want to empower your students to start to take action and feel as though they can control and make a change. So how do you do that? Oh, first of all, so how do you start this conversation? That's fine. How do you start this conversation with your students? Here's a few kind of conversation starters that ADL recommends. What do you know about the incident that happened? If there was a swastika on the school, what questions do you have? What are your feelings about what you've seen or heard? How can we help to prevent ourselves and other people from stereotyping and scapegoating others? What can we do to help those targeted? Again, these are not just on anti-Semitic incidents. These are maybe our good conversation starters for what we're seeing in the world today, yes, last night, across the country. How do you engage in that activism with your students? To the next slide. Marla? Oh. Here's a few ideas. Educate others. Bring in ADL or JCRC to do one of our training programs, peer-to-peer training, sharing lesson plans with educators. Advocate for legislation. Run for student government. Demonstrate, like we're seeing a lot of recently. Social media campaigns, raising money, talking to the press after an incident. And I always say, I promise, if you want to talk to the press, they would be more than willing to talk to students about the anti-Semitism they're seeing in schools. Community service, writing letters to companies who, for example, the famous story about the student who wrote to Steph Curry, the famous basketball player, because all the shoes were only in the boys section of the suit of the mall. Moving forward, ADL, like was mentioned, we have many resources on this. On the right, you can see a couple examples of our table talks, 2-pagers that you can find online about topics that are of current events that are happening today. Some of these are about anti-Semitism, for example, the shooting at Pittsburgh, but we have a widespread of things, everything from the immigration debate, from DACA to women's equality, to what we're seeing in terms of structural racism. All these topics, just a few kind of backgrounders and questions that you can use at your dinner table. Lesson plans that you can share with teachers. These are all free lesson plans online, 45 minutes that are good with all the kind of state curriculum requirements that you can do on these topics. Book lists, a diverse book list for basic different topics, sortable also by age group. Anti-bias bullying strategies, everything I talked about today, like everything from what is bullying to what is the online trends we're seeing can be found online. Table talks, webinars, and classroom conversation guides as well. All the data I mentioned, especially about incidents, one of the main ways we collect that data is actually by people in the community reporting it directly to ADL. We do see things in the media, but that connection either to JCRC through their reporting system or through ADL helps us see these trends in anti-Semitic and bias-based incidents that we're seeing. So please, if there is an incident that you or your student experienced, go to adl.org/report incident or contact JCRC. You can do this anonymously. You can post screenshots. You can put whatever contact information you do or do not want to put. I encourage you to do that as well. And I think that is it. Perfect. So I'm going to hand it back to Marla. We have a few minutes left to actually talk about what are the skills to respond. When we see these incidents, the swastika on the locker, the anti-Semitic comment, what should we do and what should we teach our students to do?
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so as Jonathan said, that now we're going to be looking at different scenarios, and there'll be options. This scenario number 1. As I said earlier, we're all families, parents of, young students, we're going through the lens through adult scenarios, such in this situation, a colleague tells an offensive anti-Semitic joke. During a training or when you're having these conversations with your student, swap out colleague for classmate, teacher, friend, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to ask, I'm going to read the scenario, and then there's 4 options about how you would respond. What I'm going to ask is in either show your hand a number. I'm trying to do the poll, but
I can launch the poll. So
oh, great. So we're going to launch a poll where it's going to have scenario 1 and then scenario 2, but the first one will say scenario 1. And there'll just be option 1, 2, 3, and 4 of how you would respond to the scenario that I'm going to read out loud.
So go ahead and read it, and then I'll launch the poll afterwards.
Okay. During a meeting, a colleague tells an offensive anti-Semitic joke. What would you do? 1, nothing. You're hoping for a promotion, and if you speak up, it might affect that. 2, raise your hand immediately and communicate your discomfort with the joke. 3, share with the person privately after the meeting that the joke offended you. 4, some other response. So Jonathan is going to launch the poll, and I believe you should be able to still see the options as the poll is in front of you. If I need to repeat anything, please let me know.
And Marla, so on everyone's screen, do you see 1 or 2 scenarios there? Does it say scenario 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Okay, just answer 1 then, that's fine.
It's a learning curve, I apologize.
So go ahead and select the answer on your screen of what you would do in this scenario. Right now it looks like no one has voted, so you're gonna have to click on your screen.
I am clicking, but the
I
submit
think that you're going
button
to need
is
to
grayed
finish.
out.
You're gonna need to finish both before you can submit.
Okay, so then for number 2, just click anything. Fair enough.
Okay.
There we go. I got a
This
one
might
response.
be a little messed up. I did the same thing for the last one.
There we go. Okay. We're waiting on one more.
I can't see the responses, so.
Okay, I can. I'm going to show them. I'm going to show the responses
Great.
to everybody.
Thank you. Teamwork.
All right, so here we go. So the responses to scenario 1. Can everybody see it?
No.
Oh, share results. That's why. Haha.
Okay.
So most of us select option 2, raise your hand immediately. One person selected share with the person privately. So
Does anyone, whoever picked 2, do they want to share why that was the response that they wanted to pursue? Yes.
Yeah. So I have a pretty small company, and I'm pretty sure, I think everyone there knows that I'm Jewish. So that sort of makes it a little bit easier for my situation. If I was at a bigger company, I think it would be a different situation.
And what is your name? I'm sorry.
It's okay. Danielle.
Danielle. Okay. I wasn't sure with this one. I like that. I like the way it's spelled.
Oh, yeah.
Great. So
I mean, I know we're an engaged group. There's been some self-selection for us all to be like eager beavers. We're going to raise our hand immediately. But if I weren't a co-host and I could have participated in the poll, I probably would have said number 3. Realistically, I would.
what's the distinction between picking 2 and 3? What are situations in which you may pick 2, and what are situations in which you may pick 3?
I
Margo?
was the one person who picked 3, I think.
Uh-huh.
Interesting, because I work at the Federation. You would think I'd be like, oh, go for it, right? I've been working so long in the Jewish community. I think that 3 was like a warm-up opportunity, right? It was like a little bit of a safer space to say to somebody privately, and then maybe the next time I would, say something publicly in front of a whole group.
Right. So this.
So do you, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Marlo. Sorry.
I was going to say, so in this instance, Murdo, do you feel like number 3 is like the first warning privately, take you aside,
It's
and
probably
then
the
next time
harder
it escalates?
It's probably the harder thing to do, frankly, because you have to, it's sometimes easier to do in a group, because in a group you might find people who are nodding along with you, like, oh yeah, that was really inappropriate. Whereas one-on-one, in retrospect, is it's harder. It just is. And then the trick is, how do you share it? Do you share it in person? Do you send a text? How do you do that? Which is a whole other question.
So the scenario we discussed with students based on that this is based on is when, let's say, a teacher makes an anti-Semitic comment. So what are we trying to teach the student? First of all, some of it is based on your personality. Some students are like, I know enough, I'm confident enough that I'm going to stand up right there and express my discomfort, just like Lindsay said that most of us would, right? But other students are going to say, like, look, that's not who I am. I'm for example, me, Jonathan, I'm pretty loud and a talker, but I don't confront people like that directly. I need that moment to process my thoughts and share with them privately. It's also situational. Maybe it's a safety concern. Maybe you don't know whether it was intentional or not, right? So these are the considerations that we're trying to show the students, that there is no wrong answer to any of this. Even if the answer is nothing, sometimes look, if your safety is a concern, do nothing, right? So that's kind of the start. This is one way that we're showing how that conversation is going. And I think you want to do another one, Marla?
Wait,
Jonathan,
Go ahead.
may I just jump in? This is Ron. So I think the question that we raise here goes well beyond anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about norms and cultures. And I'll take it in a different, what about the sexist comment? What about, say, a coworker stealing cash or falsifying a report or doing anything that we find inappropriate? What do we do with a family member that does something, inappropriate? And so when there's no safety concern, I think I've seen it in many other many other instances, nothing to do with anti-Semitism. The reason that I tend to raise my voice is not, if we take your 1 in 10, the 11% statistic that you had, it's not for that one person, it's for the other 9. It's to communicate to the others that that's not okay. Later we can deal with their positions or views or behaviors, and maybe they're amenable to change, maybe they're not. But the other 9 should know that it's inappropriate. And even if someone wants to make a sexist comment, or wants to falsify a report, or wants to steal money, they're not going to be doing it here.
Thank you for that. And that is a point that we often hear students here. And then there's also a power dynamic and way of showing allyship, right? When the male voices in the room call out the sexist comment, or when other voices, or based on the power of whatever the situation is, how you become that upstander, like Lindsay said. So I thought that was a perfect point, and another point that often gets raised with our students as young as middle school.
I think, when I was answering this question, I was thinking about not as much in the workforce as just dealing with my kids. And it seems like so much of what I'm hearing from them, and the example of gaming and online, and my kids love rap music, and it is kind of masked in a joke, or in this stereotype, or in something funny, and come on, mom, can't you just laugh, like the rest of us, and why do you have to take this so seriously all the time, that kind of stuff, that I would hope that if my kids were in a situation where I wasn't there to push back, that they would stand up because they hear me do it all the time. But I think more often than not, there's this cloak of it's just music and they're expressing themselves, or it's just a game online and people are just, yelling and they're not thinking about what they're, there's all these excuses to what I'm hearing, or what they're hearing, and how they justify it. That is the stumper for me.
How do you respond to that? That's the question we get all the time, right, Marla, in our trainings. What if it's just a joke? Or people say, oh, you Jews are cheap. Oh, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
How do you respond? And I open that up to the group.
Yeah. Good. I don't know. I mean, I'm at a loss on that. That's the challenge for me. I think when it's a blatant, like the visuals that you showed us, or some of the things that Lindsay, and Marla see, or that you see every day, Jonathan, it's blatant. When it's kind of masked in a song or in something else, it's a little bit harder to figure out how to respond. That's at least where my biggest challenge is.
Thoughts on how you would respond to the comment, oh, mom, or oh, dad, it's just a joke, calm down. Stop being so politically correct.
I think if it's a first conversation, the goal is to have the conversation. Sometimes it's just saying, we need to talk about it. Let's, I want to hear about these jokes. I want you to start hearing them as that being sort of an excuse, and, naming how difficult it is for a teen or a middle schooler to step into that space and say, I know this is a joke, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit. Or I know, you were just sharing a tweet or a meme, but I'd like you to understand that it just sits with me the wrong way. Just maybe planting a seed. I think one of the things that keeps, whether it's adults or teens or college students, from saying something is this fear that you have to be able to give the entire history of anti-Semitism if you step into it. Like, well, I don't know exactly why it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I kind of even laughed a little bit, so I can't say anything. And that's, we have to find something between I laughed, and if it's a Jewish person telling a Jewish joke, it's okay, and I'm supposed to know everything there is to know about we still have to step into the space in the middle and give young people the the confidence or the license or a green light to say, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert on but what you do need to start doing is talking, and not just, communicating, on this little handheld computer that you carry around, but like actually say something to the person the next time you see them that says, I know it was a joke. I've seen lots of them. I just want you to know that it just didn't make me feel good. And I can't quite maybe even put it into words, but I'm trying to figure it out and I wanted to tell you.
Right. We're going to talk about in a moment, I kind of might want to skip ahead, Marla, to our 6 simple strategies. So if you could skip, we'll come back to the scenarios in a moment. But what do you do in that moment, right? What do you do when when somebody says something like, you don't look Jewish, right? Or perpetuating that stereotype, or, oh, it was just a joke, I was kidding, or, oh, you have to hear this. Like, what do you do in that moment? And again, I do this for a living, and I even kind of get stumped sometimes, right? I don't know what to say when you hear that. You don't expect it. Maybe it's from a friend or a colleague. So these are kind of, these are the 6 kind of strategies that we teach students, and we also teach our adult audiences about responding in that moment. So I think me and Marla are going to do some acting right now. We have a Lindsay Yagi in the waiting room.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Perfect. And so here's our 6 simple strategies. Marla, take it away.
Okay. Strategy number 1, assume good intent, explain impact on you personally. You don't look Jewish.
I know you mean well, but that hurts me or can offend others for the following reasons. This is what Lindsay was saying. Assuming that good intent, that the person didn't mean to be hurtful, right? But explaining the impact on you, the difference between intent versus impact is really key here. So one way of saying like, oh, I know that joke you don't mean to offend, but let me explain to you how a Jewish person or another person of another identity might perceive that. Let's keep going.
Ask a question. Didn't you ask to borrow lunch money from me last week as well? What are you, a Jew?
What do you mean by that? This is a perfect way to ask a question. Again, just so you know, these strategies can be used against any identity or bias-based comment, right? We just took Jewish examples. But it's no different than saying, oh, well, all those foreigners are all the same. What do you mean by that? Have that person start to explain that comment and probably realize the bias and hurtful nature within it. Obviously, tone matters here, right? There's a difference between, what do you mean by that? And what do you mean by that? So be aware of that tone as well. You were saying, Marla?
It also helps the other person because sometimes, right, we just say stuff, and especially, the students, they hear stuff from a neighbor, from maybe their parent, from another student, and they repeat it, and they don't even know what they're saying. But by, the other student asking a question, what do you mean by that? The student then has to figure out for themselves what they mean by that. So then also it creates, a dialogue besides just, the student might knowing that they're saying something hurtful and then having to back it up. But for a student that might just be repeating something to say something, then, it's more of a learning curve.
And it's a way to engage in that conversation if you want to. But sometimes you don't want to engage in that conversation. So here's strategy 3.
Interrupt and redirect. You have to hear this joke. There are 4 Jews sitting on a...
Well, you not go down that path, right? Let's say you're at the cocktail party and someone wants to say that joke, just kind of start to deflect and be like, that's not the way to go tonight. Let's tell another joke. Just redirect the conversation another way.
Broaden to universal human behavior. All Jews are bad at sports.
I don't think that's a Jewish thing. I think a lot of different people have that quality. No different than saying all Jews are cheap, saying that it's not a specific thing for the group, but a universal human quality. So taking it from the small stereotype-based comment to the broader human context. And then there's the other way, going from generalizing about a whole group based on one individual, which is strategy 5.
Make it individual. Jews don't care about this country. All they care about is Israel.
Do you mean everyone who's Jewish? Or are you speaking of someone in particular, right? Maybe someone is basing a stereotype or a way of thinking based on 1 or 2 interactions they've had. So just in the same way we went from making it small to big, you're taking the generalization and making it that, isn't it just one or two people that you might be thinking about? And then the final one.
Say ouch. Those Jews are all alike.
Ouch. Ooh, ooh. Oh, really? Whatever comment or noise or tick that you make, it's a little bit childish, and even I've had students say, really? But since it's so uncommon to hear the words ouch or ooh or really or what or whatever it is in conversation, that can give you at least the moment to pause, have the person realize they said something concerning, and then you can internally think to yourself, maybe using another strategy to how you want to divert the conversation. So we could go back to the scenarios. I don't know how we're doing with time, Marla, but I wanted to make sure we get that in as we start to talk about what do we do to respond to hate in the moment.
Mm-hmm. We're okay on time. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry. One of the programs I facilitate, we're always like, does anyone have any questions? So it's kind of a little bit of a habit, but we kind of just jump through a couple things. Does anyone have any questions or comments or an example of themselves using one of these strategies and not even realizing it?
I actually have a question, if I may, for Jonathan. And I'm thinking, I want to tap into your experience engaging students of different ages. So that I think about the challenges facing older children, high school, middle school. Their peers are maturing. You can present data to them. There's I guess some background to engage in a discussion. But when I'm thinking about younger kids, say in lower school, I mean, their sense of anti-Semitism probably didn't come from hate groups on the internet. It probably comes based on things they've heard from people of authority that they respect, you know, a parent, an uncle, a neighbor. And so they lend a lot of credibility to those comments. And they're at an age where you don't just present data or start with an intellectual discussion. So I'm curious, any thought or insight that you have around how to cope with anti-Semitic comments at the lower school context?
No, and thank you for the question. And I echo what the underlying premise too, that students, what we like to say, are starting to experiment with hate, for lack of a better word. They may hear these things in the world and seeing the impact and hurt that it might cause in their lives as they start to play with this. So what do we do? So there's a few things. The conversation is very different with middle schoolers. Usually when we do our anti-bias work, we're talking about identity and differences and what you do as the difference between being a target versus the bystander versus the aggressor, right? Have students try to understand that, like we said, that all these differences are what make us like unique, but they aren't things to, target other people based on. So it's more of a conversation, not necessarily about anti-Semitism specifically, but more on a conversation about identity and allyship and who we are as people and what brings us together. And I know that sounds kind of fluffy, and we have lesson plans and book lists that talk about how you start these conversations. We don't do this anti-Semitism training. I don't recommend doing it until about 6th or 7th grade, because in younger schools, they're not ready for these conversations. So it's still that allyship and identity seeing what the similarities are. So I think of an activity that we do at the opening of our trainings with 4th and 5th graders, when we ask them just about their favorite ice cream and go all the people who like chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, whatever it may be, and you already start to see like the diversity and differences about how that all changes, or the situations in which you grew up, and then how we've all maybe been targeted or bystanders or allies in certain circumstances. So, and start to do those kinds of scenarios. What do you do when you see the student on the playground who's all alone, kind of thing? Those are the ways we start to engage in this conversation. And to your point about shared learning, I know I'm talking a bit much, is that's why we focus so much on the schools, making sure that teachers are equipped, because we always get the conversation, I'm a math teacher, why do I have to worry about all this anti-bias and stuff? But this is every day that's going on in the schools, right? So if we can start to equip teachers and students to work together on these issues, I think that's where you see that change. So I would encourage you to look at some of our kind of current conversation guides that are for younger age groups about how we just speak about identity and what makes us similar and different, kind of in that vein. And thank you for the question. If that wasn't exactly what you wanted, I'll stay on the line later and we can talk afterwards.
Can I jump in and say one thing? I really appreciate the question, and I really appreciate the depth of resources that ADL has that I know I go to on a regular basis, both as a parent and as a professional. Let's remember we're also partnering with PJ Library on this program. And although PJ Library, you know, the books published, and Robbie, you can jump in here, may not address anti-Semitism explicitly, they certainly in the One Club, you know, when you're starting to do some of your own reading, there are books around, you know, pride and Jewish identity, feeling excluded, feeling included, all of those, you know, those kinds of, you know, Jewish values and messages are conveyed. And I think one of the biggest things that to take away, because this can happen to a third grader or a fourth grader or a fifth grader, even though this, you know, ADL Words to Action workshop might not